The North Carolina High School Athletic Association awards team state championships in 4 classifications: 1A, 2A, 3A, and 4A. And I'm going to look at how the county size affects the championships and how that has changed over time. So to begin with, the classifications are largely influenced by the school population size. And if we look at each classification, so the 1A classification has a maximum student enrollment of 647. So every school in 1A needs to have, under the previous class or the current classification system, needs to have 647 students or fewer. In 2A, that's 1,024, and in 4A, or I'm sorry, in 3A, it's 1,643, and then 4A is anything above 1,643. This graph also shows us the county population, and what we kind of tend to see is that the larger the county is, so we see this general trend in this direction, the larger the county is, the larger the schools are. So most of the 1A schools are in the smallest counties, and then 2A schools are in slightly larger counties, 3A schools are in even bigger, and then 4A are kind of in your biggest counties here, your largest counties. The counties range from less than 10,000 in population to over 1 million in population. We do see some outliers in this data. There are schools of each type of category in our 2 largest counties. So we do see that there are 1A, 2A, 3A, and 4A schools in the largest counties. But in general, we do see this trend that as the county is larger, the classification and the student population is larger, going from 1A up to 4A. Again, 1A is this classification that has schools less than 647 students. 2A is between 648 and 1,024. 3A is between 1,024 and 1,643, and then 4A is your larger than 1,643. So those are the classifications and some of the kind of general information about school population and the county size. So looking at the state, North Carolina is a rapidly urbanizing state. Our 2 largest counties, Mecklenburg and Wake, are home to Charlotte and Raleigh, each county with around 1 million people in them. And there's a lot of population around the Piedmont Crescent. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we look at these numbers. So one of the things I'm going to show later is looking at population ranking. So instead of looking at the actual number of people in the county, what I've done is ranked them, and we'll see that later. So in terms of ranking, Mecklenburg is number 1. It has the largest population in the state. Wake County is number 2. Guilford is number 3. Forsyth County is number 4. Cumberland County, which is where Fayetteville is number 5. Durham County is number 6. Buncombe County is number 7. That's where Asheville is located. New Hanover, the Wilmington area, is number 8. Union County is number 9, and Gaston County is number 10. And it's been this general trend that the majority of the state's population lives in this Piedmont Crescent. It kind of goes where I-85 and I-40 go. So if you look at the state's overall population, you're going to see a lot of the state's population in this region here. Looking at the other end of the spectrum, we can see some of the smaller counties. So Tyrrell County is the smallest in terms of population. So it has a population rank of number 100. Hyde County nearby is the 99th least populous county. Then we go over to the mountains for Graham County is the 98th least populous county. Next we have Jones County back in the east at 97. Camden County at 96th. And Allegheny County back in the mountains at 95. And so again, these rankings are going to come up when we look at how championships are awarded and which counties win championships in high school sports in the state. So this is just showing us just the 1A championships for a 60-year time period, 1960 to 2019. And what we see is there are a lot of championships in these rural communities. We see that some of those very rural communities didn't have any championships, but you can look at some of the least populous counties in the state. Graham County showed up as number 98 in terms of population, but it won a substantial number of championships in this time period, as well as other counties in that region. As we go up to 2A, we see kind of a move to more to counties that have a larger populations than those most rural. So we see more counties in this moving away from kind of the rural. We see the trend continuing up to 3A now, and now there's very few rural schools that are rural counties that win 3A championships. Now that doesn't mean there aren't any. Some school districts do kind of have more of a consolidated high school. So instead of having 2 or 3 smaller high schools, there may be one larger high school. So this is again 3A. And then moving up to 4A, as you would expect, there's very few rural counties that win 4A championships. Most of these are consolidated in the urban areas of the state, but there are some more rural counties that have combined their high schools and do win a 4A championship. But again, the 1A through 4A schools aren't equally distributed in the state. There is a concentration of the larger classifications in the more populous counties. So this is a graph I'm going to use to show how the county population rankings have changed for each classification over time over that same 60-year time period. So on the left axis, we see the county population ranking from 0 to 100. So the most populous counties are going to be at the bottom. The least populous counties will be at the top. And if you just maybe think about what you would expect, for me, when I was approaching this data, I assumed that we would see a line near the bottom for 4A, meaning that the largest counties in the state are likely to win 4A championships. And I know there'll be movement over time, but generally I expected somewhat of a line near the bottom for 4A, then a line for 3A, and keep moving up. Here's 2A, and then maybe 1A schools representing the least populous counties. And one thing to keep in mind, I mentioned that the 2 largest counties have 1 million people in each, and that represents about 20% of the state's population. So just here at the bottom here, this is 20% of the state's population in those 2 counties. And the North Carolina High School Athletic Association classification system puts 20% of the classification, 20% of the schools in the 4A classification. So the top 20%, largest 20% of student population goes in the 4A classification. And then for 1A gets the smallest 20% of schools. And from a county perspective, that actually ends up being 61 counties. So it takes from county 100 all the way through county number 39 to equal the same population as the largest 2 counties. So the 61 smallest or least populous has the same population as the 2 largest. So 61 very small counties, 2 of the large counties. So just another thing to keep in mind, if you're thinking about the classifications, you're thinking about the counties, you're thinking about what counties win the championships. So looking at the actual data, here's 4A. So as we probably would expect, the 4A championships over the 60-year time period come from the larger schools. It's close to the smaller numbers here. So averaging all the schools that won a state championship in 4A. That's what we see when we see this line. And this is consistent with what I think we'd all expect. We see 3A then added on. There's variation, of course, over time. There was a period where the county ranking was higher in the 70s and 80s, but now it's almost somewhat kind of converged with 4A in these lower numbers. So in recent years, 4A, the average county ranking size has been about 5. For 3A, it's been a little above 10, or maybe over the past 10 or so years, it's been an average of 10. Moving on to 2A, we see there's a lot of overlap with 3A. So especially in the earlier years, 60s, 70s, 80s, 2A and 3A county sizes were the same. That's somewhat diverged in recent years. There's been a larger gap between 2A and 3A in recent years, where the 2A schools, on average, population ranking is somewhere in the order of the 25th largest counties in the state in terms of population. And then finally 1A, and we can see that in the 70s and 80s, 1A championships mostly went to the least populous counties in the state, an average of about 60. But then in more recent years, we've seen this downward trend closer to actually 2A and 1A and 2A are the championship teams are very similar to each other in terms of their county population, and it's not representative as much of the rural counties as it was in previous years. So this just gives us some idea of how the championships have changed over time, and then the difference between 1A, 2A, 3A, and 4A. I think we see the pattern we expect, where 4A championships come from the most populous counties, 1A championships come from the least populous counties. However, in recent years, with charter schools and private schools that are in urban areas, we do see much more of a convergence of 1A and 2A county population rankings, county population size being more similar than it has been in the past. So we see that 1A graph or 1A line coming much closer to 2A than it has in previous years.